Rainbow Six Siege is a great game, but it hasn't been without its quirks. On release, there were weird visual glitches, bugs that would give you crazy advantages, and map designs that were more than questionable. Like the first item on our list, the Rafters Ladder. If you don't know, the map Clubhouse we have now is actually a rework of an older Clubhouse, from a much older and worse version of itself. Many changes came from this rework, like adding the downstairs bathroom, adding upstairs construction room, and moving around parts of bar. But nothing was quite like the change from a ladder to a staircase for Garage of Clubhouse. Rafters right now is already hard to attack. The enemies often bring barbed wire, operators like Azami, Malusi, Fenrir, and impacts if you bring a shield operator, maybe even a Frost, a deployable shield, it doesn't matter. Not to mention, you can have players below, whether they're Harry Potter, behind the motorcycle, on the lounge wall, an oil pit, or even just on the doorway. They can easily help their teammates in Rafters, which makes it 30 times more hard to push. So imagine going up against all of that and all of that pressure while also having to get locked into an animation by going up a ladder and not being able to defend yourself. It was borderline impossible, and a huge frustration for most people who were playing Clubhouse. So when Clubhouse got initially reworked, they took out that ladder in favor of the Rafters staircase that we have now. That was a much needed change that I'm glad happened, as most people are, which is not at all the case for this next change for the SMG-11. Back in year 1 of Siege, Siege had a bit of a problem. You see, as Siege was evolving as a game, people's playstyle evolved with it. It evolved into a more heavy gunfight style of play than a utility-based one that Ubisoft intended it to be. A huge part of this was the ACOG scope. The ACOG scope was such a big deal and such a big impact on the player base that later into Siege's lifespan, they removed it from a lot of guns to prevent people from using operators just for that scope. One of these weapons most people seem to have forgotten was actually the SMG-11. Yes, the SMG-11 on Smoke and Mute, and even on operators like Thatcher and Sledge, had an ACOG on it. So you could literally spawn peek on defense with Smoke and Mute with an SMG-11 ACOG, which was super fun. But to be honest, it was completely unnecessary. Not only was it just not really useful in most combat scenarios, but even if it was just so much of an advantage that the operator didn't really need that they took it out of the game. So they took it away along with many other ACOGs at the same exact time, like Bandit's MP7 ACOG, Jaeger's AR ACOG, Ash's R4C ACOG, at the time Buck's ACOG, and many more later to come. Now, many of you might actually have already known that, but a lot of people seem to have forgotten that Ash actually had 3 breaching rounds instead of her current 2 breaching rounds. Here's why they took it out in the first place. You see, Ash at the time as an operator was the best entry fragger in the entire game. Not only did she have 2 of the best weapons, but she also brought 3 breaches and a full set of flash grenades. If you don't know, at the time, Jaeger, 1 ADS, could take 3 flash grenades before it was disabled, whereas now they can only take 1, but they infinitely recharge. All this meant was that if they had 1 ADS somewhere, Ash could fully burn it by herself and then use her Ash breaching charge to destroy a deployable shield. So what would happen a lot of times is they would put 3 ADSs in front of 1 shield. The Ash could burn 1 ADS with 3 flashes, and then 2 other attackers could bring flash grenades and burn the other 2 ADSs. Then Ash could Ash charge a deployable shield and walk in with her great gun, which was just a huge counter that made deployable shields borderline useless, especially in competitive play. So not only did they take away her flash grenades in favor of what she has now, which is claymores and breaching charges, but they also took away 1 of her ranged breaching charges. Her being able to also have 3 ranged breaching charges made it to where she could completely counter Castle, who at the time only had 3 castle barricades. So Ash as an operator, aside from her actual ability, has been completely broken and reworked many different times. And the fact of the matter is that she used to have 3 breaching charges, which was absolutely overpowered. And that is not at all the case for this next change that came to Ela. Now, Ela, when she came out, was actually a very good operator. Her gun was borderline broken, it had almost no recoil, her ability was pretty good because you couldn't set your screen shake intensity to be off, and she came with a deployable shield, which at the time had way more value than it does now. But Ela also came with a unique passive ability. Anytime that Ela would get downed, no matter if you had an Ela mine still on you in your inventory or not, you would be able to press your ability button after a second, which would stun anybody around you, once you got downed and pressed that ability button. To be honest, this didn't really do much, because most of the time you were either getting headshot, or the second that you got downed, you would immediately die, so you couldn't actually activate your ability because it took a second for you to be able to activate it. Also, if they killed you, them being stunned didn't really do much, unless you had a teammate to refrag them, but chances are, so do they, meaning that all you did was really put yourself at a disadvantage by getting downed in the first place. So when they took out Zophia's passive to be able to completely revive herself, they also took out Ella's passive to be able to stun people with a random mine. Now that is a pretty niche thing that I guarantee you a lot of people did not know existed at all. Another change that seemingly slipped through the cracks was Smoke's ability to breathe through his own smoke actually getting removed. So this is a pretty recent change, but a while ago, they were trying to make it to where there weren't any innate passes in the game. For example, they took out Zophia's passive, and like I said, they took out Ella's passive. They also tried taking out Smoke's passive, which is the ability to breathe through his own smoke. Well, when they did this, everybody hated it. They changed this and every single person was complaining. Nobody thought it was a good idea, and the fact of the matter is, he literally has a smoke mask on his face so that he can breathe through his smoke. Even his trailer for an operator, when you unlock him, has him breathing through his own smoke. So not only is it a part of the lore, not only does it logistically make sense for how his character is built and looks, but also it just makes smoke a lot more useful. Being able to sit in a smoke where they can't see you, they can't walk in, and being able to walk through it with a shotgun just makes way more playmaking potential, and them taking away that just made nobody happy. It did nothing positive for the game, so I think literally a few days after they made the change, they completely reverted it, which is why you probably didn't hear about it or know about it, because it literally only lasted a few days, because everyone hated this change. The change that people really loved, though, was the fact that when people left when you interrogated them as Caveira, you would still get that interrogation. Well, what do I mean by this? Back in the day, if you played Caveira and you downed somebody and you went for the interrogation, all somebody had to do was leave the game. Then you couldn't interrogate them, but they could always just rejoin, so it was like nothing really happened. They just took away your opportunity to interrogate for absolutely free. It made Cav, an already pretty bad operator, that much more useless. But now, if you go into the game and you try to leave while Cav is in the animation of interrogating you, the teammates get interrogated anyways. They still get wall hacks onto you if you're an attacker, and actually it happens faster. The interrogation activates immediately the second you leave. So leaving not only doesn't do anything, but it actually puts you at a disadvantage, because not only does it make it to where your teammates get interrogated faster, but now they don't have you to watch cameras for flanks, or cutoff cameras, or drones that they might be using. So it just made a really unhealthy game exploit completely void, and it is one of the best changes that Rainbow Six Siege has made to itself as a game in Siege history. A change that was almost just as impactful was the change made to Frost and Malusi's shotgun, the Super 90. Now this Super 90 shotgun had a nickname, and it was called the Sniper 90. It's because this thing was a sniper in a shotgun form. You could shoot somebody from super far away ADS, and they would get downed, farther away than any other shotgun currently in the game. And even if you were un-ADS'd, it would still do tons of damage from super far away. After a little while of this going completely unnoticed in year one, they finally nerfed it. And they didn't just nerf it, they nerfed it to the ground, making this shotgun still, to this day, one of the worst shotguns in the entire game. Maybe a bit of an overtunement for the shotgun, but definitely something that still needed to happen. Another change that most people forgot happened in the first place was the change to claymores. If you didn't know, on release, if you brought a claymore, you only brought a claymore. One singular claymore. You didn't bring two. And it was only until a few years ago that they changed it and made it to where you could bring two claymores at a time. This was due to the fact that, one, claymores were pretty useless if you didn't have two, as only bringing one claymore that may or may not get value at all that's easily counterable just was not worth it compared to the options of bringing flash grenades, which at the time you could bring 3 on almost every single operator, frag grenades, which at the time you could cook, smoke grenades that you could use for plants, all kinds of different stuff. Just like, claymores didn't really make sense, to be honest. And at the time too, Nomad was being played a lot, so being able to bring one claymore over bringing a Nomad just didn't make sense, which means that Nomad was played a lot more than she needed to be. But if you could bring 2 claymores instead, you didn't have to bring Nomad as much, which made for a lot healthier of a operator pool. Another secondary gadget that you might not have actually remembered got changed was the bulletproof camera. Now, most people know that the bulletproof camera didn't actually used to EMP things. Right now, you can EMP operators like Yana or Finka to stop them from using their gadget, or you can EMP drones to stop them from moving, like a mute jammer. It doesn't last forever, but it lasts for a few seconds and enough to make you actually make a difference if you're using it like that. But something else that got changed about the BP is the fact that now you can move around the camera. In the same patch that allowed you to use an EMP on the bulletproof camera, they also allowed you to be able to move that bulletproof camera around. You used to be not able to do this. You were stuck looking in the exact direction that you placed the bulletproof camera, meaning that if you place it in a bad spot, well, you can't really look around. And if you hear someone planting and you can't calm that, you can't ping to your teammates that they're planting, or you can't ping that they're swinging, meaning that the information brought by the bulletproof camera sometimes just wasn't the best, especially for ranked players who couldn't talk to their teammates, which made a bulletproof camera literally worse than a default camera, even though it was bulletproof. Now, to be fair, you weren't always able to melee it, but bulletproof cameras are typically placed so deep into sight that meleeing it usually doesn't happen most of the time unless it's just shot outright, meaning that bulletproof cameras were useless, especially compared to a deployable shield, which we talked about earlier being really useful back then, or impact grenades for roamers, even nitro cells, things of that nature. It just never made sense to ever bring a bulletproof camera, but now that they reworked it, it completely does. Something else that I love that they reworked is actually reinforcements. Now, most people know that you used to only have 2 reinforcements per person. You didn't have this big reinforcement pool that you could use, which was a great quality of life change. But what most people don't know is they actually used to reinforce slower. Reinforcements now take way less time than they did back then, making site setup so much easier, especially if you're playing a mode like Quick Match, which only gives you just a barely amount of time to set up site. Having a faster reinforcement speed is great, especially now too that maps are coming out way bigger and bigger. Maps like Lair, maps like Nighthaven Labs, these are huge maps, and you have to cover a lot of ground in the prep phase to be able to reinforce everything that you need to reinforce. We're talking hatches that are across the map, multiple hatches that are across from each other, you name it. You just had to reinforce a lot, and it was really, really slow back then. Meaning that not only did you have to reinforce a lot, but you had to rely on your teammates to help reinforce too, because if they didn't, it would take you even more time and put you at more risk when you reinforced later in the round. Now that they've sped up the reinforcement of walls and hatches, that's not even an issue anymore, which is one of the best changes, quality of life changes in specific, that they've ever made to Siege in Siege's history. Speaking of reinforcements though, that's not actually the only 2 changes that they've made to reinforcements. A change that most people don't know about is the fact that the hatch reinforcement animation is completely different than it used to be. When you go to reinforce a hatch now, you place it down in the center, and it's this one long line. Then you pull and twist the lever, and it extends a little bit, and then you put the lever down and it extends fully. Seems pretty simple, right? Well, back then, it wasn't simple, because you'd put it down in the middle of the hatch, and it would slowly expand outward from all 4 corners. Not only was this completely goofy looking, but it was unrealistic, and in a game that prioritizes realism and things looking clean, the hatch reinforcement animation changing was actually pretty nice to look at, and the old one, although it might have been satisfying, just kinda looked goofy, to be completely honest. Something else that definitely needed to happen was the last item on this list, and that is the Chalet rework. If you've been playing this game from year 5 onward, you might not know that Chalet actually got reworked. Chalet used to be a lot worse of a map. When you go into Fireplace of Chalet, there's these huge windows. There's especially the balcony K9 window. But did you know that wasn't the only double window there? Actually, there were tons of windows, just like Lobby on Bank. Also, there used to be another staircase that got removed. If you go to West Main, the West Main staircase specifically, that didn't just used to lead to the basement. It used to lead to the 2nd floor as well, giving another staircase they could use to go to the site. This has since been removed and put into Solar, which used to not exist, by the way, making Chalet a lot more playable for anybody who wanted to play in piano. Taking away this staircase in favor of the Solar staircase also meant that they had to add Solar in general, which used to not exist. There used to just be a balcony on Chalet with a double door leading directly into Master, making the top floor almost completely unplayable for this map. And honestly, the map in general was just unplayable. Every single place that you went, there were 30 attacker angles looking onto you, which, as we've seen with maps like Outback or Consulate, is a recipe for disaster and can make or break a map that is good or a map that is bad. But with that out of the way, my name's Alka. Check out this next video, and I hope I'll see you there. Later.